The one white minister who did speak on his own, Dr. Roy D. McLean of Atlanta's First Baptist Church, preached a sermon that was absolutely safe, and this was 2 years after the May 17 decision. Anyway, one read his statement. It was clear that he was opposed to the decision of the Supreme Court outlawing segregation in the public schools. It was distinctly more pro-segregation than pro-integration. Dr. McLean is an eloquent and convincing speaker. When in early summer 1956 he spoke about the May 17 decision, his words were as usual carefully chosen and beautifully uttered. Both the Atlanta Constitution and the Atlanta Journal, in their issues of June 25, 1956, quoted heavily from Dr. McLean's pro-segregation sermon. The Constitution quoted Dr. McLean as follows: "The last 24 months have engendered more strife and hatred than the last decade of normal progress." The Atlanta Journal quoted Dr. McLean, "Thus, righteousness cannot be legislated any more than education can be. One cannot be forced into the acquisition of facts. Instead, he can be encouraged, shown and nurtured." He said that coexistence is possible without cohabitation, but this does not mean, however, that there is a first and second class citizenry. Such could never be justified in democracy, Christianity or anything. Evidently, Dr. McLean have forgotten history. Negroes and whites had coexisted in this country, USA, for 3.5 centuries, and a glance at any Negro audience testifies that there had been considerable cohabitation. Organised church bodies, unlike the local churches, did support the Supreme Court's 1954 decision. Several denominations spoke out, for example the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Presbyterians, the North Georgia Methodist Conference, and the Council of Churchwomen from 15 southern states. However, even the pronouncements of these southern church bodies made no real impact on the local churches. They continued their segregated ways. Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. tells of his experience in the local Atlanta church. I had heard of Roy McLean's ability as a preacher. So shortly after he came to First Baptist Church on Peachtree, I decided to go hear him preach. I asked Mrs. Crawford, one of the trustees of Ebenezer, since deceased, and Mrs. Hudson if they would like to ride out with me for Sunday morning worship. We went early and arrived before Sunday school was out. I parked and we went in the front door into the sanctuary. We were met at the door very cordially, and we went in and seated ourselves about 2 seats down on the right hand side, with me taking the aisle seat. We had been given bulletins of the order of worship at the door. A white woman came in, bowed to us, smiled, and seated herself alongside the 2 ladies who were with me. We sat for about 20 minutes, and then I noticed 2 or 3 people near the podium deep in the discussion. Finally, one of them came back and said to me, "You folks can worship down in our chapel." I told him we were quite all right where we were, and he went away muttering to himself. Another came, much rougher talking than the first, and said, "Now, you folks know we have a place where you can worship down in our chapel. You will have to go down there, and you will have to go now." I said to my companions, "Well, I guess we'll just go back." The man kept saying to me in a very ugly mood, "Well, are you going? Are you going?" Mrs. Crawford said, "We didn't come here to cause any trouble." The man said, "Well, you are going away somewhere," and grabbed me by the arm. "You are just here to make trouble, that's all." I told him he was mistaken, and he shoved me, and we left. The full story of the Atlanta experience of the Reverend Ashton Jones is told in his book After Prison What? Published privately by Reverend Jones in 1969, La Vista, California. In an editorial on June 9, 1965, the Christian Century commented, "The Reverend Ashton Jones, sentenced to 18 months in jail for disturbing public worship at the First Baptist Church of Atlanta, Georgia in 1963, has now been pardoned and released from prison by the Georgia State Department of Pardons and Paroles after serving more than 8 months of the sentence. The crime for which the nearly 70-year-old minister paid his heavy penalty was his effort to integrate public worship at the all-white First Baptist Church in June 1963 by attempting to enter the sanctuary of the church in the company of a Negro student. Ashton Jones was guilty of something more than disturbing public worship. He disturbed in Atlanta a slumbering Christian conscience. He threw a 70-year-old minister in the church of the church into jail. Ugh, that's sad. for very little reason. Even those responsible for his conviction were not able to get Ashton Jones out of prison until he had served 8 hard months. Roy O. McLean, the pastor, appealed to the State Board of Pardons and Paroles for clemency for Jones. Jones had been convicted on a Georgia statute dating back to 1792 and revised in 1866. When kneel-in demonstrations started, the Board of Deacons of the First Baptist Church voted 58-2 not to allow Negroes to enter the sanctuary. Paradoxical as it is, churches that believe in and practice segregation have been sending missionaries to Africa and Asia for years to convert the heathens to Christianity. Yeah, cheek of them, eh? In chapter 11, the author has related his experiences with a few of these missionaries. He heard Africans talk about this dichotomy when he was in Liberia, Ghana and Ethiopia. African students at Morehouse during his presidency remarked about the way missionaries from America segregated Negroes in the United States and sought to save the souls of black Africans in Africa. Many black people in this country, USA, believe that some white missionaries go to foreign lands to evangelize coloured people in order to atone for the way in which black people are brutalized here in the United States. Though persuaded to Christianity by southern missionaries in Africa, the converted Africans would hardly be welcome to fellowship and membership in the very local southern churches that helped to foster the foreign missionaries' enterprises. The experiences of Sam Oney from Ghana with the Tatnall Square Baptist Church in Macon, Georgia, are convincing proof of this assertion. Oney made his way to Mercer University, also in Macon, Georgia, upon the advice of a Southern Baptist missionary and alumnus of Mercer University. Sam Oney succeeded in breaking down the colour bar at Mercer, which at that time was 133 years old, but the officers of Tatnall Square Baptist Church advised their ministers to get the message to Oney that he would not be welcome at the church. He was accepted at the Vineville Baptist Church after the pastor of that church convinced the officers and the congregation that Oney was not a Georgia Negro. He was different from an American Negro. He was African and had been converted to Christ through their own Southern Baptist missionaries in faraway Ghana. It has been true ever since emancipation that any foreigner is better treated than our Negroes in the United States. Even German prisoners rode unsegregated in that country, USA, during two world wars, and Asians on the whole received better treatment in the nation than black Americans. Now, a black Ghanaian was accepted into Mercer University and the Vineville Baptist Church, forbidden territory for a Negro American, or American Negro. That's insane. That's totally nuts. But Sam Oney could not break the colour bar at Tatnall Square Baptist Church. In the summer of 1966, the Tatnall Church voted not to seat Negroes at its worship services. 2 Negroes did worship there in June and were allowed to worship one time in peace, but the occurrence almost split the church asunder. In July, the church voted 289 to 109 to close its doors to Negroes. Sam Oney was in California when he heard about this decision and the furor which precipitated it, and he felt compelled to try to become affiliated with Tatnall Square Baptist Church during his senior year. He wanted to tell the Christians at Tatnall how their policy of segregation was hampering their missionary work in Africa. Oney attempted to worship there, therefore. This experience is best told by Dr. Thomas J. Holmes, pastor of Tatnall, author of the book Ashes for Breakfast, Judson Press, Valley Forge, PA, probably Philadelphia, 1969. The young foreign student, neatly dressed, knowing impeccable English, fluent French, and 3 tribal languages, approached the red brick church on the corner of the Christian University. There he was stopped rudely by the ushers of the segregated congregation. They had been instructed to turn all Negroes away. And to these Georgia middle-class white men, Sam Oney was just another, and it says the N-word there. They blocked his way. He asked for the privilege of talking to the deacons or reasoning with them, but the ushers wanted no part of Sam Oney. In their view, he had been a troublemaker ever since he had integrated the university and brought integration pressures on the campus church. When Oney politely insisted that he be admitted, he was seized by 2 deacons of the church. One applied a headlock on him and the other dragged him down the steps. Oney kept his cool and did not fight back. He endeavoured to reason with his adversaries from the sidewalk. "Go to the church where you are a member, or some other church," a deacon ordered. "No," said Oney. Meanwhile, the chairman of the deacon had called the police, who were conveniently nearby with a patrol car. 2 policemen appeared in their summer grey uniforms, pistols on their belts, and led the African student to the car. They placed him inside and kept him there until he agreed to leave quietly, while the people inside the church sang the hymn by Frank Mason North. Where cross the crowded ways of life, where sounds the cries of race and clan, above the noise of selfish strife, we hear thy voice, O Son of Man. Sam only tried once more in October, and once more he was denied. By this time he preached a sermon at the front of the church steps, and his message was carried to the nation on television. Before he preached, he tried to enter. A plainclothes policeman, an off-duty deacon, and an active member of the church blocked him. On the very steps of the church, only told the 3 men, "Do you not see the inconsistency of what you are doing? You send missionaries to my land to tell me about the love of God, and then when I come to your land, I do not find the same love in your hearts. Does God not love in the same way here? Do you not care if my people go to hell?" And there's a footnote indication for the book Ashes for Breakfast, page 17. The pastor, the assistant pastor, and the minister of music of Tatnall Square Baptist Church wanted the church to be Christian and open its doors to Negroes. This was more than the majority of members at Tatnall could take, and in September the 3 ministers were ousted by a vote of 250 to 189. Later, in collaboration with Gaynor E. Bryan Jr., Pastor Holmes wrote his graphic and moving book, from which the author has quoted above, Ashes for Breakfast. On the local scene, prejudice looms large in housing. As long as white and black people cannot live in proximity, so long as one Negro moving into an area can chase out 1,000 white families, and 2 Negroes can put 10,000 whites to flight, it is going to be very difficult to have desegregated schools and churches. And it goes on about the attitude towards them. And down the bottom here it has, for the race problem is ubiquitous, and the author had never been able to escape it. It came up in every national and world Christian conference he ever attended. It is ever present. One often hears that Negroes never forget the race problem, that they talk about it all the time. This is equally true of white people. In church and state alike, the black man has been continually in the white man's mind. One need only read anti-Negro newspapers reaching back 100 years and anti-Negro books written over the decades, or study the laws the various states and the federal government have enacted against the Negro, to find that the black man has dominated the white man's thinking since the first Africans landed there in 1619. The Negro, the author is convinced, is the white man's obsession. The black-white relationship has been so crucial that black and white alike are inclined to attach great significance to any slight breakthrough a black man may make in this relationship. Thus it was national news when the Federal Council of Churches of Christ in America elected the author its vice president in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1944. It was national news because it was the first time that the Federal Council, organised in 1912, had chosen a black man to serve in the second spot of the council. The president of the Federal Council at that time was Bishop G. Bromley Oxnam of the Methodist Church. The Negro and the white press headlined his election, and Time magazine called him a religious liberal, citing as proof that though he was a Baptist, he had never tried to convert, the author had never tried to convert his Methodist wife to the Baptist faith. And he became widely known in churches, invited to speak amongst white and black groups all over the nation, etc., etc. And he went through a couple of experiences as vice president of the Federal Council that he felt were worth relating here in this book. So that gives you an indication of what those churches were like in the author's day. They had the cheek of it to go to the African countries and preach them love of God, etc., etc., then convert them. And then when they came to America, no, you can't come to our church because you're the wrong colour, all that sort of stuff. Like, hypocrite much? Oh my gosh. And the people start writing horrible letters to him from Tennessee. And it's a chapter 19 on Martin Luther King Jr. Story about him. And the author's contact with Martin Luther King Jr. He met him and he became like his mentor. Friends as well. Great friends. He states here, so great were the public demands on his time, however, that after one semester Martin Luther King had to give up a seminar on non-violence. Had he accepted his offer, the author's offer, to teach at Morehouse, he would no doubt be alive today. But his name would not be among the immortal few who have achieved real greatness. Furthermore, had the city officials of Montgomery been enlightened, or even sensible, the life of Martin Luther King Jr. would have been a different story. Then too, had Mrs. Rosa Parks behaved as she was supposed to, and as Negroes generally had behaved for decades, that is, if she had gotten up and given a white man her seat, there would have been no Montgomery bus boycott, and then there would have been no civil rights movement, and so forth. It is highly probable that Martin Luther King Jr. was the only man who could have led the Montgomery bus boycott for an entire year without violence, with the exception of the violence instigated by white people. Without Dr. King's charisma, his brilliant mind, and his unquenchable spirit, Negroes would hardly have stuck it out. Of the countless incidents the author could relate about Martin Luther King Jr., he has chosen 3 because it seems to him that they assert so perfectly the quality of the man's soul, his vision, his courage, his magnificent capacity for self-denying love. The first of these concerns Rosa Parks, who was arrested December 1, 1955. Nobody knows just why on this particular occasion she didn't choose to obey the bus driver's order to get up so a white man might sit down. Perhaps she was too tired after working all day. Perhaps she was just tired of being pushed around all her life by white folks. At any rate, she sat and the boycott was on. When the Montgomery officials discovered that violence could not stay the protest or stop the boycott, they resorted to mass arrest using an old state law against boycotts. Dr. King, who was in Nashville at the time, knew that if he returned to Montgomery he would be arrested too. En route to Montgomery, he stopped overnight in Atlanta. His father, frantic for his son's safety, assembled a group of friends to consult with them about the wisdom of Martin Luther Jr.'s immediate return to Montgomery. It was on February 22, 1956 that we met at the residence, the author of Martin Luther King Sr., and according to Martin Luther's own book, Stride Toward Freedom, the following persons were present, and he lists all these people that were there. Martin Luther King stated he must go back to Montgomery. His friends and associates are being arrested. It would be the height of cowardice for him to stay away. He would rather be in jail 10 years than desert his people at that time. He had begun the struggle and he couldn't turn back. He had to reach the point of no return. So the author felt that he had to defend Martin Luther's position. He was a man of deep integrity and firm convictions. How could he have decided otherwise than to return to Montgomery? How could he hide while his comrades in non-violent arms were being carried to jail? Convinced that he had been unlawfully arrested when Martin Luther King was put in jail and unjustly convicted, and therefore could not in good conscience pay the fine, Dr. King announced that he would serve his time in jail. The pronouncement shocked and stunned the court. The author understands that the judge almost begged Dr. King to pay the fine. Some person, at the time unknown, paid it, Later it was learned that Clyde Sellers, the chief of police, had paid it, remarking that it would be cheaper to pay the fine than to have Martin Luther King Jr. in jail at the city's expense. Dr. King's decision not to pay went almost unnoticed at the time, but to the author it was one of the most momentous decisions of his whole civil rights career. It made a tremendous impression on the author. He would obey an unjust verdict, but by serving time rather than paying a fine for something he should never have been convicted of, he registered for the whole world his protest against injustice. His great decision has motivated and will continue to motivate the actions of others as we pursue this long journey up the precipitous hill towards racial justice, democracy and Christian living in this country, in the USA. A third incident will dramatise Martin Luther King's high regard for the law, even for unjust laws. Those who have condemned him for admonishing people to break unjust laws have not realised that when he himself violated them, he was not being irresponsible, nor was he advising others to be irresponsible. It was his way of seeking to achieve social change without instigating physical violence. If he had violated the law and then cried for amnesty, his action in a sense would have been irresponsible and would have indicated disrespect for the law. But when Martin Luther violated the law, he did so consciously and deliberately and was always willing to pay the penalty exacted by law. Even though the law was blatantly unjust, he was willing to suffer for a righteous cause in the firm belief that this kind of suffering was redemptive. And he talks about Dr. Martin Luther King when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. Not only white Atlanta voiced this opposition, many Negro leaders were jealous of the man's tremendous power, his stature, his leadership. Others sincerely believed that he was stirring up trouble. Look at this. Where is he? Where does it say he was? Is it a certain place? And it states, maybe it's in Atlanta. It was a magnificent and moving experience. Black and white, rich and poor, Protestants and Catholics, Jews and Unitarians, politicians and statesmen were there, and they all sang happily the civil rights song, "We Shall Overcome," black and white together. Atlanta was proud of itself and glad that it did it, and the author was overjoyed that Dr. King's hometown had truly honoured a most deserving man, even though he was black and was living a doctrine of militant non-violence, which was unacceptable to many of those who came to honour him. Probably Malcolm X's lot. No. It should be like this, you know. Maybe it was him, maybe it wasn't. Can the author says here in this chapter, I can sing Atlanta, the Trailblazers. He can sing and praise Atlanta as he sung the national anthem and America as he recited the Declaration of Independence. Or he could sing and praise Atlanta as he sung the national anthem and America as he recited the Declaration of Independence, read the Bill of Rights, and rejoiced over the adoption of the 13th, 14th and 15th Amendments. He knew that the Declaration of Independence was not meant for him, that its chief architect, Thomas Jefferson, was a slave owner, that the 13th, 14th and 15th Amendments have not been fully implemented, and that the land of the free and sweet land of liberty are not equally applicable to black and white. But these are the ideals to which the nation clings and the goals toward which it strives when it is at its best and thinks nobly. It is not always Easy for a black man to swear allegiance to the flag, but the American dream is embodied in that allegiance, and until it is repudiated, one can still hope for work toward the day when it becomes a reality. As long as Atlanta struggles towards the dream, he also can sing Atlanta. He can sing the national anthem, and my country 'tis of thee, because after visiting many countries in Europe, Asia and Africa, he has concluded that the United States, despite all its imperfection, is the best country for him, and that his job was to continue the battle, is the best place for him, and that his job was to continue the battle to make America in reality what it claims to be. Possibly Atlanta is overpraised, but having travelled in 47 of the 50 states, could testify that black-white relations there were as good as in any city in the nation, and better than in most. He talks about walking through Atlanta as many years, going shopping and all that sort of stuff. He was all downtrodden, looked down upon, etc., etc. He couldn't accept that segregated condition, and neither could other Negroes. We are going to finish there. If you liked this video, it's really made you aware of what went on in this author's era in the 1800s and so forth, then give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments, and we'll get back to you on those as soon as we can. And then go share this with everyone else, your family, your friends, your neighbour, and your community. In remembrance of these kind of people, these African Americans who wrote these books on their life experiences, what actually happened to them, and tried to make people aware of the segregation and the racism and the false teachings of the churches in America at that time, saying one thing but doing another thing, right? Practicing another thing. Had some good suggestions in there, like when the Jews, the black people, etc., etc., got together and they're singing the same song, all unified. Brilliant. So it is possible to squish those separations, those divisions that have been deliberately made, and come together as one people, human beings, regardless of colour, sex, race or creed. To basically worship God, receive God's love, and then pass it on to every other human being around you. Replace it with a pointy finger, bony finger. You're this, you're that, because you're of this church, you're that. We are more superior to you because our church is the chosen, our prophet, our guru, whatever. All this technical stuff. Well, it should be focused on God's love. Love for you, love for me, love for everybody. Compassion, kindness, charity, and so forth. Not these tassels on your shoes or tassels on your cloak or something like that, or dressing up looking like you're part of Iron Maiden, you're an Arab into Iron Maiden, and cussing people on the street because of their skin colour. That is just insane. Okay, so as we said, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments below, and then go share this with all you know.